Hey everyone, Ater here with Horizon Hobby, and today I am super excited because this video that you're watching right now is the first of several videos that are coming to the Hangar 9 YouTube channel surrounding the all-new J-3 Cub 10cc. And I'm super excited because I love the J-3 Cub both in the full scale and the RC world. It's a very good looking airplane, it's very relaxing to fly, and just very enjoyable. So with that being said, I'm very excited because Hangar 9 released a great size J-3 Cub in my opinion because of an 82.5-inch wingspan. It has a big presence in the sky, flies like a big airplane, especially if you're using AS3X Plus, which I'm going to be talking about in a second. But yeah, not only does it fly like a big airplane, it's got a big presence in the air, but also whenever you take the wings apart, it essentially fits in most vehicles. You don't need a trailer or anything like that. And yeah, that's essentially why I am very excited for Hangar 9 to release a J-3 Cub of this size. So before we get into the assembly of the plug-and-play J-3 Cub 10cc, I'm going to provide a quick overview of the three available options in which you can get the Hangar 9 J-3 Cub 10cc. The first option is the almost ready to fly option. So that option is going to come with just the airframe only. So with that being said, you have to supply your own electronics and you are going to have to do much more assembly than the plug-and-play version. And that's going to bring us to the second option, which is the plug-and-play version. So that's essentially going to come with the airframe that is already mostly assembled and comes with pre-installed Spektrum electronics. Now what's nice about the electronics in the plug-and-play version of the J-3 Cub is that not only are they pre-installed, but they also support smart technology and they are ready for you to plug in your AS3X Plus receiver if you want to use the latest and greatest in flight stabilization. Not to mention that the power system that comes in the plug-and-play combo is compatible for both 4S and 6S LiPo batteries. And the third and final option in which you can get the J-3 Cub 10cc is the plug-and-play version with the battery and receiver combo. Now this is going to give you the plug-and-play version of the J-3 Cub 10cc, so you will get all of those pre-installed Spektrum electronics that we talked about earlier, and you will also get the AR637T Plus AS3X Plus 6-channel receiver, so you can utilize the latest and greatest in flight stabilization on this Cub, and you will also get a 4S 5000 milliamp battery, which is the recommended 4S battery for the J-3 Cub 10cc. Now this combo is the perfect option for the Spektrum user looking to get into the world of wooden RC airplanes, because not only do they get the latest and greatest in flight stabilization systems with the AS3X Plus receiver in the combo, but also in the combo they are going to get a 4S LiPo battery, which is great because it is a smart battery, so it is going to talk to the smart electronics that are included with the plug-and-play version of the J-3 Cub 10cc, which is going to relay important telemetry information back to your Spektrum transmitter. But also, since it's a 4S battery, it's going to be a lot more forgiving. It's not going to be overpowering for anyone who might be intimidated by a wooden RC airplane. But what's great about the J-3 Cub 10cc plug-and-play version is that it comes with two wooden props. One that is ideal for 4S, so if you get this combo, you can put on the wooden prop that's ideal for 4-cell setup, fly it. Once they get comfortable, all you have to do is change out the prop to one that is recommended for the 6S, which again comes with the J-3 Cub 10cc, and you can put in a 6S battery, and essentially you are ready to try this airplane out on 6S and make it come alive. So with that being said, those are the three available options in which you can get the Hangar 9 J-3 Cub 10cc. Alright everyone, and that's going to cover it on the different options in which you can get the Hangar 9 J-3 Cub 10cc. Hopefully it helps you decide which option is right for you. And with that being said, I think it's time to get into the assembly of the plug-and-play version of the J-3 Cub. So again, the plug-and-play has pre-installed Spektrum electronics, and a lot of the assembly is already done for you. That's what makes this combo my personal favorite. And also, you are about to see just how easy it goes together. But then on top of that, we are going to be installing the AS3X Plus receiver and doing an initial setup on it in this video. So for that, I'm going to be using my Spektrum NX8, which is essentially an NX8 Plus because it is updated with the latest NX Plus firmware on it. So just figured I would go ahead and point that out. But yeah, guys, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the assembly of the Hangar 9 J-3 Cub 10cc plug-and-play. When you first take the J-3 Cub 10cc out of the box, it's a good idea to go over all of the covering with a covering iron. It's fairly common for wooden aircraft to develop bubbles or wrinkles in the covering due to experiencing various temperature and pressure changes during the shipping process. You can set the temperature on the covering iron to around 300 degrees Fahrenheit in order to shrink the covering and get rid of these bubbles or wrinkles. It's also recommended to use a covering iron sock to prevent scratches on the covering. If you choose to use one, it's recommended that you increase the temperature on your covering iron by about 10%. Once this is complete, we can now move on to the empennage installation. Remove each M3 lock nut and M3 washer from the threaded rods installed in the vertical stabilizer. You can also remove the tail support from the rear threaded rod. Insert each of the rods into the holes of the horizontal stabilizer. It is important to note that the top side of the horizontal stabilizer covering is removed, so then the wood on the vertical stabilizer can key into its appropriate location. Now slide the threaded rods into their appropriate location in the tail section of the fuselage. Make sure to guide the tail wheel bracket as necessary in order to fit the vertical and horizontal stabilizer into position. Turning the model upside down, you can then position the bracket with the tail rigging into place between the tail support and the fuselage. Once the tail rigging bracket is in place, slide the tail support back onto the rear threaded rod and secure the tail rigging bracket using an M3 by 10mm sheet metal screw. Reinstall each M3 washer and M3 lock nut to the threaded rods so that the vertical and horizontal stabilizers are secured to the tail section of the fuselage. Be sure not to over-tighten the hardware and damage the structures. Remove the set screw from the tail wheel collar in order to apply blue Loctite on it and then reinstall it while ensuring that the tail wheel is straight with the rudder. Now slide an M3 by 14mm socket head screw through a pre-bent aluminum cable tab and then through the hole in the top side of the horizontal stabilizer. Slide a second cable tab on the screw from the bottom side of the horizontal stabilizer. Secure the tabs using an M3 lock nut. Once this is complete, you can use another M3 by 14mm socket head screw and M3 lock nut to install the tabs on the left and right side of the vertical stabilizer. Keep in mind that the tabs for these will have the cables pre-attached. It's also worth noting not to over-tighten the hardware and compress the wood structure of each stabilizer. Attach the clevis to the tab on the top side of the horizontal stabilizer. You can adjust the clevis so that there is light tension on the cable, yet it does not distort the positioning of the vertical or horizontal stabilizer. Once you are happy with the cable tension, you can slide the tubing down towards the end of the clevis so that it is better secured on the tab. You can repeat this process for the bottom and other side of the vertical and horizontal stabilizer. Flipping the model upside down again, we can now attach the wing strut mounting tabs to the fuselage using two M3 by 10mm socket head cap screws for each tab. You can apply blue Loctite to each screw that is used to hold the wing tab in place. Once this is complete, you can now place the landing gear into its appropriate location on the fuselage. Once the landing gear is in position, locate the two flat landing gear straps. These two straps are used to secure the landing gear to the fuselage in the rear positions, and are secured using two M3 by 10mm sheet metal screws per landing gear strap. Next, locate the two saddle landing gear straps. These two straps are used to secure the landing gear in the front positions and are also secured using two M3 by 10mm sheet metal screws per strap. Remove the windshield hatch from the fuselage by pulling up on it in order to separate the four magnet retainers that's holding it in place. Once the windshield hatch is removed, you will now be able to remove the top hatch by pulling back on the spring-loaded latch as shown in the video. Once the top hatch is removed, you can now slide the wing tube into its hole on the fuselage. Starting with the airplane's right wing, you can remove the foam tubing from the jury struts. This foam tubing can be used to recover the jury struts when transporting the model so that the jury struts do not damage the wing. You can now fit the jury strut ends into their corresponding holes in the underside of the wing. Now slide the right wing onto the wing tube and against the fuselage. You can guide the aileron servo lead into the fuselage and connect it to its corresponding extension. Secure the wing panel into place using a 1/4-20 nylon wing bolt. Repeat the process with the left wing up to this point. Before attaching the struts to the fuselage, it's recommended that you flip the model over so that the weight of the wings will naturally set the correct dihedral. You can now adjust the strut end fitting so that the hole in the strut end aligns with the hole in the mounting tab. Note that when the aircraft is upside down, the strut end will fit underneath the tab as shown in the video. Once the holes are aligned, you can insert a pin through the strut end and the strut mounting tab from the top side of the fuselage and secure it into place by sliding a retaining clip through the hole in the pin. You can now repeat this process with the other wing strut. With both struts attached, you can tighten the nuts against the strut end fittings to keep them from vibrating loose. Apply some blue Loctite on the threads near the strut end fittings in order to keep the nut in place. You can now repeat the strut attachment process for the other wing. Note that you may need to open up the holes on the strut mounting tabs a bit in order for the pin to go through. And as you can see, everyone, the plug-and-play version of the J-3 Cub 10cc assembles very, very easily, especially on the tail section, because you don't have to do any crimping and you don't have to work with any glue. There's no measuring on the horizontal stab with the wings. Again, it just bolts up nice and easy, and there is no glue required. Essentially, the last thing that we need to do in terms of physical assembly is installing the prop and installing the seats in the pilot if we want, and also connecting the control linkages. But before we get into that, I'm going to go ahead and install the AR637T Plus into the J-3 Cub. So check this out. Taking a look inside the fuselage where the receiver is mounting, you can see one of the other benefits of the plug-and-play version is that not only are the electronics installed, but they are properly routed through the airframe, and you can see that each wire is labeled, so then you know which port to plug each wire into on the receiver. Cutting the zip tie holding the wires in place, you can now plug in each servo lead into its corresponding port on the receiver. If you plan on using an AS3X Plus receiver or any receiver with a gyro, use some foam gyro tape to secure the receiver to the fuselage. You can route and secure the antennas as shown in the video. Thread 2 1/4-20 nylon bolts into place at the back seat location. The height that each bolt sticks out should be adjusted so that the seat can slide into position while still being able to stay secure. Once happy with the fitment, repeat the process for the front seat. Verify that the front seat does not run into the receiver. Alright, so before we go any further on the J-3 Cub in terms of assembly and setup, I'm going to show you all how to essentially create a model and get it all set up for the J-3 Cub 10cc. So first, we're going to go ahead and create a blank acro model. And once that's loaded up here, you will see that we are at the system setup menu. We're going to go down to model name. Here in the model name menu, you can go ahead and rename this to Hangar 9 J3 Cub 10cc. Once you have successfully named your model, you can select back to go back to the system setup menu and just scroll down below the model name. You will see aircraft type. Go into the aircraft type menu, you can go down to the wing type and change this to dual aileron. This is because there are 2 servos for the entire wing of the J-3 Cub. So basically, like this diagram that you see here, one servo operates the left aileron and another servo operates the right aileron. So just make sure that it is set to dual aileron for your wing type. The tail can stay at normal because there is one servo operating the entire elevator and one servo operating the entire rudder. And that's essentially all that you need to do within the system setup menu for now, so we can go back to the main screen. Once we are back at the main screen here, we can go ahead and select the scroll wheel in order to go to the function list, and down here we can go to rates and expo. And I'm going to essentially set up my dual rates and expo on one switch, which is going to be switch F for both the aileron as well as the elevator, and then also the rudder. All right, so real quick, I'm going to show you how I personally like to set up my dual rates and expo. So again, like I said, I have all of the dual rates and expo set to one switch, so switch F here. So at position 0, you will see that I have the dual rates set to 100% and 25% expo for the ailerons, and I'm gonna remain at 25% expo on all of the switches, and you can see that going down to position 1, I have 80% and 60. I have the same exact setup for the elevator here, as you can see, and then going to the rudder, I typically like to run about 5 to 10% less expo than all of my other surfaces, but again, you can see that the dual rates are still at 100 for position 0, 80 for position 1, and 60 for position 2. And again, this is all personal preference. This is just how I like to set up my dual rates and expo. Now that we have our dual rates and expo set up, we can go back to the function list, and the last thing that we need to do before we bind up the transmitter to the receiver on the airplane is go down and select our throttle cut. So selecting throttle cut, you can see that the switch is inhibited. If you highlight this right here with the scroll wheel, you can now flip any switch up here in order to set your desired switch for throttle cut. Typically, a lot of people, including myself, like the H switch back here in the back right of all Spektrum transmitters. And if you go ahead and activate this switch by flipping it, you can see that switch H is now highlighted. Pressing the scroll wheel, we have now set up our throttle cut. So whenever the H switch is in position 1, like you see here, the throttle position will be at -100% no matter what throttle range we have on our stick. It's always going to stay at -100 in order to keep the throttle from powering up whenever you do not want it to. And that's essentially it. So going back to the list, this function list right here, you can go back to the main screen, and the next thing to do is to bind up the Hangar 9 J3 Cub 10cc to this transmitter. All right, everyone, now that we have our model configured in the transmitter for the J3 Cub 10cc, it's time to bind up the receiver that's in it up to our transmitter. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So first, I'm going to plug in the battery right here. Whenever that's plugged in, you can hear the AV and ESC powering up, so that means we do have connection. I'm going to press and hold the button on the AR637T Plus until I see that orange light flashing, so that means the receiver is in bind mode. Now that I've done that, I'm going to press and hold the bind button. One other thing that I also have too is the throttle hold switch activated for safety. And you can see that whenever I power up the transmitter while holding the bind button, the transmitter is going to go into bind mode. It has bounced up to the J3 Cub now. So the bind is complete. It says that we have telemetry. The telemetry is auto-configuring itself. Again, that's another big perk of the AVN ESC that is in the plug-and-play version of the J3 Cub 10cc. That paired with the receiver, you get a lot of important smart telemetry information. So yeah, the transmitter is now bounced up to the receiver. You can see that we have directional control of the ailerons. Now, we do not have the linkages hooked up to the tail just yet because I wanted to make sure that the servos were centered through the binding of the transmitter, because whenever this transmitter is bounced and we have made no servo adjustments, the servos are essentially sub-trim on the plug-and-play version. Now, with that being said, the servos are now centered and we can now set the proper linkage length in order to get a neutralized surface for both the elevator and the rudder. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do right now. Starting with the rudder, adjust the length of the clevis so that when the clevis is attached to the outermost hole of the control arm, the rudder is flush with the vertical stabilizer. Once you are happy with the adjustment, slide the tubing over the forks of the clevis to hold it in place. You can then tighten the nut against the clevis to further secure it. You can repeat this process for the elevator control arm. Although the aileron control rods come pre-assembled on the plug-and-play version, it's a good idea to confirm that both ailerons are flush with the wing at their neutral position. Now, the last thing that you really need to do before you get into the AS3X Plus setup is confirming that your servo settings are correct. So this includes servo direction, so making sure that everything goes the right way. You also want to verify your servo sub-trim is correct, so everything is straight in terms of the sub-trim. Now, if you have the J3 Cub 10cc plug-and-play version, you don't really have to worry about that because it's already done for you out of the box. Everything is at its optimum position. And then the last thing that you want to do is make sure that all of your servo travel is correctly set. So in the sense that you want to make sure that all of your deflections are at the proper degrees or measurements. So those three things you want to make sure you do before you get into AS3X Plus and doing the first time setup. Because whenever you go into forward programming and do the first time AS3X Plus setup, that gyro is going to be looking at the servo settings that you have at that time. Now, if you did the gyro setup first and then went and changed settings in your servo in terms of sub-trim, travel, or direction, that's going to be very problematic because the AS3X Plus gyro was looking at the old servo settings. And again, if you change anything, it could fight the gyro, or it will fight the gyro, and that's not very good. So again, we've already done the servo sub-trim. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that the direction is going the correct way. So let's go ahead and do that. So going to the servo setup menu, pretty much everything that we need to do before we get into the AS3X Plus setup and forward programming is going to be in the servo setup menu. So going to our reverse over here, we are going to make sure that everything goes the right way. So first I'm going to give right aileron, and you can see here that both the right aileron and the left aileron are reversed. So I'm gonna go ahead and reverse the right aileron and also the left aileron. Now you can see that the aileron servo directions are going the correct way. Looking here, we can see that our elevator is also reversed. So going over to elevator, we can go ahead and reverse that. It is now going the correct way. And lastly, the rudder. Looks like everything besides the throttle is reversed here. So we are going to reverse the rudder, and we can now confirm that everything goes the proper way. We are now done with the servo reversing.
Using the servo travel within the servo setup menu, adjust the travel for each servo. A good starting point for surface throws are 30 millimeters up and 20 millimeters down for ailerons, 55 millimeters both up and down for the elevator, and 60 millimeters both left and right for the rudder. You can now reinstall the top hatch and windshield hatch and fit the fuel cap into position on the windshield hatch. Lastly, you can remove the propeller nut to install your choice of either the 4S or 6S propeller to the propeller shaft, then reinstall and tighten down the propeller nut to secure it in place. You can use a screwdriver to keep the motor from turning in order to fully tighten the propeller nut.
And there you have it, everyone. We have successfully completed the assembly on the plug-and-play version of the all-new Hangar 9 J-3 Cub 10cc. And as you can see, the plug-and-play version goes together effortlessly. There's no glue needed. And it also sets up on the Spektrum transmitter very easy. So we got it set up on the Spektrum NX8 in this video. Pretty much all that's left to do now is to take it outside, take it for its first flight, or if you want, which I recommend doing, if you have the AS3X Plus receiver, you can go ahead and do the first time setup for AS3X Plus, so you can tune the flight stabilization system and enhance the experience with the J-3 Cub 10cc even more. Now, if you're unsure of how to do the first time setup of AS3X Plus, I will have linked in the description Spektrum RC's YouTube video explaining the first time setup and also just the overall AS3X Plus setup on plug and play aircraft. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. If you want more content on the J-3 Cub 10cc, stay tuned, there's a lot more to come.